those things that you just knew but you never set out to prove, that the original motivation for the legalization of abortion was not, as is commonly believed through the marketing hype of the so-called pro-choice crowd. It was not women's rights or privacy or reproductive freedom or pro-choice or any of that. Those were, again, just marketing slogans that were used to justify the legalization of abortion. But the real motivation behind it was eugenics. It was the latest mechanism by which a certain select group of ultra-wealthy elitists in this country were going to try to enforce this idea of controlling populations by controlling certain elements of those populations. And what we had known for a long time was that the element of population they wanted to control was the African American community. Not control as much as eradicate, but that this was the original motivation behind the legalization of abortion. And we set out to be able to prove this beyond just being able to just saying it ourselves and saying that we believe this was the motivation for it. We wanted to find the documentation to prove it. And again, we spent a little over 3 years during the research on this. And I have to admit that what we found in many cases stunned even me. I sometimes think that I'm somewhat jaded after 30 years in this battle, but some of the things that I found as we were researching this for this documentary were pretty shocking as it relates to the issue of race and how that played into the legalization of abortion.
Wow. I know it has been corrected, but some of my listeners said that they missed the first portion, so I just want to make sure that I repeat guest for today's program, Mr. Mark Crutcher. He is the president and founder of Life Dynamics Incorporated. He is the writer, director, and music editor for the documentary film Ma'afa 21, Black Genocide in 21st Century America. Mr. Mark Crutcher, our guest for today's program. Before I definitely want to share more information from the documentary and what you just talked about, before we go forward, I did want to ask, you are a white man, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The name of this program, The Cows, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system that is dominated by racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you feel that such a system exists, and do you think that is an accurate definition for that system?
What? I mean, obviously, you can't deny that racism exists. I mean, I don't think that's even a debatable position. From what we have researched in this, the issue goes beyond simply race and goes to the issue of elitism and eugenics. If you go back to if you go back and study the days, which is where we began, by the way, we began our research in the late 1700s and up to the mid 1800s. That was the jumping off point for our research.
Yes, sir.
What we were looking at was the actions that were taken by the people in this culture who had made their incredible fortunes off the backs of slaves. And make no mistake about it, there, as we found and we point out in the documentary, there are major international, multinational, billion-dollar corporations on the New York Stock Exchange today who originally made their money in the slave trade, either directly or indirectly or as a peripheral agent, like insuring slave ships or whatever it might be. There were a lot of different ways that these people made their money in the slave trade. And one thing I, just as a side issue here, I often point out is it's tempting for us today to look and say that to look back at slavery and say that the hub of slavery was Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia or the cotton plantations of the South, when in reality the hub of slavery in America was Wall Street in New York. Everything in the slave trade was basically controlled from that venue. The cotton plantations were basically just where the labor was done, but the mechanism by which this was carried out was in New York. And that continues even to this day with the eugenics movement, which is still headquartered in New York. But in any event, what we looked at was the attitudes of these people as they began to feel that the approach of the end of slavery was approaching. You have to remember that in the early 1800s, the slave owners in America, these white, ultra-wealthy elitists who had created this system, were at least smart enough to recognize that slavery had ended with all of our trading partners. It had ended with our closest neighbors in both Mexico and Canada, and that it was unrealistic to expect that it was going to continue here in the United States. The rumblings were there, whether they thought, they didn't know how it might end, but they were concerned that it would end. And what they were mainly concerned about was what would happen when you released 4 million slaves into the society and you had artificially kept these people uneducated and basically unemployable anywhere but the cotton field. What was going to happen when you released them? And they weren't concerned, contrary to what a lot of people think, their concerns were not just about retribution or anarchy or, people like Nat Turner. The ultra-wealthy can always isolate themselves from those problems. What they were concerned about was what the financial impact would be. You have to remember that there were 4 million slaves in a nation that had far exponentially fewer people than it has today. So 4 million people represented a much greater percentage of the population than it does today. And if you think about just...
Mr. Crutcher?
Yes, sir.
I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to check because it seems like it's deviating a little bit from the question, and this is real important because I want to kind of get a framework for our discussion because I definitely want to get more involved into exactly what you're talking about. But I did want to just make sure I got a clear answer to the question, which was global system of racism, white supremacy. Do you think it exists? And the definition that I have for both racism and white supremacy, which is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe who they classify as not white. Do you feel that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I can't tell you if that definition is accurate. What I look at, what I see, and again, this goes back to the research that we did and the reason I was going down that trail. What we saw was that the problem is elitism, in that these people consider themselves better than people that aren't like them. And that very often and normally does translate into racism. It's very tempting. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, then you're saying that the real problem is not racism, but elitism. I'm saying that that's the root problem, but that the outgrowth of the elitism is always racism. Because the people that tend to have this elitist mentality do tend to be and not just the everyday ordinary white guy or even the wealthy white guy. I'm talking about the ultra-wealthy white elitist, and we still have a lot of them in existence today. And that is the origin of this problem.
Okay. I want to make sure I like to highlight things to make sure people don't miss information. You said that you feel that elitism That is the underlying problem. But the problem is that this elitism always produces racism.
It manifests itself as racism.
Okay. And you said you would not say that definition is accurate. Do you believe that we're in a system of racism, white supremacy, where white people dominate the non-white people worldwide? Do you think that's accurate?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you took all what you and I might agree are the so-called money